Okay, before I start anything off, I'll just get the obvious joke out of the way that you're all expecting. I thought Death Parade is going to be the best anime this season because it reminded me of Death Note for some strange reason. Okay, you happy? I mean, come on, that isn't very original. Even the anime knows you're going to think that. Highlight, welcome to Death Parade. Anyway, without the Death Note joke, what did I think about Death Parade? Well, I thought it was a good fun anime, even though it might not be something I would call a masterpiece or really top tier. The anime has several good moments and well executed points and elements that helps create its good quality, even if some of the plot points and characters can end up being a bit lacking at times. So here's your quick plot summary. The premise of Death Parade revolves around the existence of a place where a quote-unquote bartender, who in actuality is an arbiter, that'll judge two people when they die, with the use of a death game, if you will, with the purpose of bringing out the darkness of the soul so that the arbiter could more easily judge them, with the anime mostly focusing on a bar named Quindecum and its bartender Decum, or if you want to go by the Japanese, Dekema, along with a black-haired woman, and yes, I know she has a name, but I guess that's technically a spoiler, not that any of you would be quote-unquote crying, but hey, it's more of a matter of principle than anything. Or attempted principle at the least. Starting off, one thing I liked about the anime was the world it was able to create, with the overall premise being unique, interesting, and original. It just lends itself to being so easy for us to wonder and wanting to know more about this world, even if it honestly could have had more detail than they put into it. But nonetheless, concepts such as the arbiters not being human, the overall hierarchy of this world and society, and general operations and functions of the world itself can easily help maintain and create interest in the world, even if that interest is more from what we see at face value, rather than how it progresses through the plot. But luckily that's definitely not the case for all the aspects of this anime, because the overall best part about Death Parade is how they handle the judgments for the people that come in, with most of them being very good and interesting. The highlights being the first one with the couple, the actor and the shut-in, and the one involving a murderer. One of the points that makes this so interesting is the mystery of who these characters are, as us the viewer tries to put together the pieces of the people who come in and find out more about their lives. For instance, the anime is able to keep itself from being predictable and create some great twists, as nothing is like it first appears, since at the beginning it may seem obvious who's going to receive what judgment and what their character is like, well, until the show explains more and more about them, with most of the characters having a lot more to them than what is just on the surface. For instance, what we see at first might look like an average happy newlywed couple, but in reality they have problems and distrust we don't see on the surface. The anime effectively takes use of several different psychological ideals, from what people are willing to do to save their own life or just take revenge, which can result in many things, from the characters going completely nuts or just being completely broken down. And what really makes these scenes work is their explanation about their past and a strong reason as to why they would react in this way. And in turn, it creates a very psychological, justified, and interesting approach to their character, as an unjustifiable reaction loses power and legitimacy to the audience, with the result of all this being very realistic and well thought out characters. But to be fair, I don't really think I can see them as the most amazing 5-star characters ever, since most of them only get one episode and then they're gone. And I can't help but see the stories as not giving enough development and depth to justify their quick departure. But don't get me wrong here, they are still very good characters with motivation, emotions, and a believable thought progression. And with all of this wrapped up in a psychological approach, which, like I said, easily makes it the best part of this anime. Although on the other hand, not all of the stories had a constant level of quality. The story about the college students was nice, but it kind of lacked the emotions and drama that made the other stories so great. And next up, the one about the old lady wasn't all that interesting, but granted that was more about other characters than her, and I'll talk about that later. And last up, the one about the idol and the fan, while I didn't particularly hate it, I didn't really end up liking it all that much either. Although, to be fair, it does have some good emotions in it, along with the psychological idea of sacrificing yourself for another, even if it is a bit misguided. And it does have a well done story based around the life of a fan and an idol, even if it isn't all that memorable or interesting, especially in regards to the girl's side of the story. Although the moment when I started to not take it so seriously was when they started putting in the fan servicey panty shots. And then there was the moment when almost all of the guys' clothes just ripped off for no reason. Well, except for the muscles, I guess. Yeah, it was just kind of distracting to emotions and the story, just a tad. But hey, at least they're not being sexist with their fan service, I don't know. Although to be fair, as a whole, the judgments overall are still very good with a clear use of emotion and psychological elements, even if the quality isn't always constant. Okay, so a lot of the characters in the judgment were really good. But one of my major complaints is that I can't see the main characters as being especially noteworthy. But definitely not bad, since they do have good elements to go along with them. Although the creators never really took full advantage of what they honestly could have had to make them extremely good. Starting off, let's take a look at Deckham, who is honestly kind of plain and boring, with one of the main reasons just being how flat and lifeless he can be. Although I will say that his politeness and chivalry was very charming, but that's not really much of an amazing personality. Okay, now before any of you jump at me, I know there was a reason and this is kind of a point of his character, since he isn't human and therefore doesn't need to act like a human, and yes, that's true. But honestly, having a character who isn't human, but has human traits, or even none at all, can be very interesting. For instance, why do you think people like the killer computer type character so much? It's the element of mystery and or curiosity of something that is not completely human. But my complaint here is not that he's contrived. It's just that he acts flat out boring and somewhat uninteresting, which does kind of hinder the uncanny mystery that he could have had. Now they do try to fix this by having him develop more humanistic qualities, along with how he questions the world around him. And if the creators pulled this off correctly, they could have had Deckham be so much more interesting and give him the depth he needed to be rememberable. And honestly, the transition is kind of sloppy, where it is mostly just a sudden change of heart without any logical thought progression. They never really give much focus to what is going on in his head. The most they seem to want to do is just something along the lines of Deckham saying he finds the black-haired woman interesting or her ideals are fresh, which really isn't a well thought out and interesting thought progression by itself, which results in when he does show emotions, they end up being a bit lacking and a tad unjustified. And lastly, the anime never really presents the dramatic change in his character all that much. Now, yes, he does have some change, and yes, he does have some interest, and yes, he does have some small amount of thought progression in his development. And yes, these are good things for his character. But honestly, he really lacked the focus and strong thought progression to really make him defining. Although, to be fair, there were two scenes at the end that really depicted his mindset and what he did for the black-haired woman. And while these scenes were nice to show some psychological elements to his character that helped create interest in him, it really can't bear the full weight of his mindset and psychological development. Now, even with all this in mind, I don't hate Deckham or even think he's a bad character, but he really didn't have the elements to make him all that impressive. And in the end, doesn't really add that much to the show's overall quality. So next up we have the black-haired woman, who does contribute more to the show than Deckham and is more well written. But as the hardcore fans of this anime start to slowly turn on me, I have to say that she isn't especially amazing. First of all, they do present her with a strong sense of mystery by not upfront telling everything about her, which leads to curiosity from the viewer to learn more about who she is and why she is here, with this being effectively expanded upon as the show gives out more aspects and info regarding this, and in turn helping to raise more mystery and interest. Although that doesn't really overshadow that for most of the anime she didn't really have a strong presence, which more so stems from her fairly mediocre personality. But what really helped her, and Deckham also, was just to watch their interactions, which did help present them as being friends, and in turn to help us the viewer to just flat out enjoy them interacting off each other. Whether that was just to hear them talk about the people coming in, whatever was on their mind, or even just to see the black-haired woman cooking food for Deckham. And lastly, the extent that Deckham goes to in the end just to make the black-haired woman happy was pretty touching, and just how much commitment and effort he puts into it. Sure, these interactions aren't 5 stars, and I can easily think of other anime that have better interactions. But honestly, I would be lying if I said that they were hurting the anime. Now, since I am talking about the black-haired woman, and she is a major part of this anime with the most time devoted to her backstory, it's only fair that I talk about that too. First of all, one of the things I liked about the ending and her backstory was just the atmosphere that it created. Whether that was just a scene with them playing cards with images that represent each other on them, to the charming skating scene where they just let the music fuel the atmosphere. These scenes just let the characters breathe, and were effective in showing what the characters were thinking just by expressing it through visual imagery, along with amplifying the reality that this all won't last. And like the rest of the backstories, the ending has some good emotions. Now for those of you who have watched the show, the best example of this is the choice that Decim gives the black-haired woman near the end of the anime, which resulted in us just seeing it tear at her psyche. Okay, while there's several things I liked about the ending, I can't say it's perfect either, with one of the main reasons being its message to cherish life felt a bit weak. And Decim's sudden flip-flop to understanding human lives really doesn't help this aspect much either. But more so, the black-haired woman's backstory, which had the goal of telling us why to this message, was really never powerful enough to justify it. Now don't get me wrong, it was good, and like a lot of other things in this anime, I feel it's really important to stress that it wasn't bad. We get to see more about her life and how she ended up in Decim, along with having her react to the events of her past, which does help add to her sympathy. Although on the other hand, one thing we never get to see is why her life was so important. It felt more like a basic cause and effect, with this event caused that event type deal. And while the skating scene's atmosphere was very nice, it really should have just been a compliment to show her backstory and not the main provider, since all it really does is just show random clips of her life. And a clip show is not a proper backstory, because it doesn't help to show and express a detailed mindset of the character so that we can in turn be fully attached and moved by the message of this anime. We're never really given that much detail with her relationship with her parents, or how the event that led her to Decim took place. On a side note, you see how hard it is to try to write these without spoiling everything? Anyway, this combined with Decim's sudden change of heart kind of weakens the message of the anime overall. And lastly, Decim and the black-haired woman are really the only two constant characters that have any serious attempt at development or exploration, which isn't a particularly fatal flaw since they are side characters with less focus. But nonetheless, it doesn't help the anime that much also. While Oculus does have some good mystery and interest at first, he never really has all that much to follow up on. Ginty, who does have more screen time devoted to him, just has a pretty much basic ill-tempered and rude personality, with, to be fair, an attempt at some character development that didn't really go anywhere, or really add much of anything to his character. And finally, there's Nona, who doesn't really do that much except present a plot point. Now, none of the side characters are bad, since they aren't contrived, lacking critical information they need to function, or being overly pretentious. But more so, they never add all that much to the show. Now, before I wrap things up, I don't want to give off the impression that I dislike this anime, because honestly that isn't true at all. There was never a point where I was bothered or felt like this was a chore to watch. This anime was just flat out fun to sit through, and in all fairness, it never really did anything that was horribly wrong, since any complaints I do have are more about it being underdeveloped and lacking its full potential than anything else. From the main characters to even the side characters, I did enjoy seeing their presence on screen, even if at times they might have lacked a bit of complexity. As for the two mains, what really helps their character more than anything else is their interactions. Although what really pushed this anime to be good was the judgment scenes, with their strong use of psychological and emotional progression. While Death Parade isn't something I would particularly be constantly praising and pushing people to watch, I wouldn't deter anyone from watching it if it piqued their interest. And you know, I'm not a big fan of the could have been better equals bad idea, so long as the anime still has good elements to go along with it, which Death Parade definitely does. Let me welcome you to another exciting episode of End Slate, where this one is going to be very unique and interesting. Spoiler, not really. First off, we have my review of 11 Eyes. Or if you want something different, and by different I mean another review that involves me, there's my Your Lie in April review. And last up, we have my Hummingbird and my Twitter account, and links for everything in the description. What a wonderful and magical world I have created for ye, huh? Now go out and enjoy it. Don't just sit there.
Get a load of this!